same question myself. I call it a gift. It's a mystery. Unknown origin it comes, which is not exactly a true statement, but it is pretty much true. Each morning for the past 11 years and 4 months, I have written a poem each morning, which, dear God, that's more poems than even Whitman and Dickinson wrote. It's rather obscene, really, but it's part of my routine. It keeps me focused on life itself, and it keeps my mind active, and I love it. I love the world, and I write about the world. One of the ideas in my life and in my poetry, and really in each of your lives, is story. We each live inside of a big story and a lesser story and a lesser story. And for most people throughout the ages, going all the way back to the Greeks and Romans in the, quote, civilized Western world, as well as all the, quote, less educated ones and all the islands, natives, and so forth, it goes back to their religion, to their faith. Over the great dome, as Wordsworth and the Romantics talked about, the great dome of heaven over us. And so I will begin the reading today with the story that I live under, and that most of us, simply by virtue of the fact, according to Dr. Jung, the archetypal psychiatrist, said, if you're born in the Western world and live your life here, you are influenced, whether you consider yourself an atheist or not, you are born under the force of the myth of Christianity. And by myth, I mean the stories, the great religious story. So I will start with story, and also within this story, well, it's like a nest of Chinese boxes, one inside the other. But we have our personal stories, and we weave those into a tapestry. We're constantly weaving those. And my second book that I will read from is called On Becoming. We are all perpetually becoming, sometimes sadly, who we are. And how we know that, those of you who, some of you are still in middle age, maybe a little younger, and then you have post-middle age, and then you have this age, and we just keep transforming ourselves and so forth, and we can't help it. It's what they call the perennial way. It has to do with life and death, and that great circle. And even in death, friends, we're stardust. We're nothing but stardust. We're made out of little chemicals that founded someplace up there when the one that we call I am said, you are. And as a dyslexic Frenchman said, Viola. Here we are. So that's sort of where we're going with this reading. But I will not start with the first book. I wrote a poem around Valentine's Day that I'm fond of, and I thought I would start with that. Even though Valentine is over, but our hearts still pump and we still love. Saint Valentine's, there are many, many stories about him. And this captures the one that I love the most. Because I've been writing a series of poems called An Old Man Leaning into Life. The old saint toddles down the long, cold corridor to the cell his brothers had provided, the one facing southeast and containing a glazed window. Like the whole being of God, light streams through the window onto the small, ragged piece of vellum and onto his hands, and farther back a little onto his face and body. But the other light comes from the center of his heart, radiant as love. He can hardly keep it in control, except by writing notes that are nothing except blood-red color of life and the voice of Christ. Sometimes he has to use a leaf and a needle. Like Braille, the leaf slowly states its phrase, and he shuffles back down the long corridor and out into the village where he finds one who receives the thing they might ever receive that reminds them of grace. So a little Valentine's for all of us. Now, those of you who have lived in my former life have heard some of these poems, The Main Streets of Nazareth. And and I start with this, it's Lent, of course. Now, those staunch Episcopalians out here, forgive me for having color on the altar. It should only be green, so I just took liberties with it. I'm much more Celtic in my view of Lent than perhaps others. Nevertheless, under this dome of Christianity, ancient tradition is Midrash. The Jewish scholars dating back to early time would take these scriptures, the stories, and so forth, and they would make variations. They would read between the lines, and they would come up with new ideas, and they could rewrite sections and so forth. So I'm using that, and I've rewritten some stories, and these are a little long. The others I will read are very short lyrics, but I think that maybe these will give you a sense of getting into my language, into my rhythm, and attune your ears to listening, and at the same time having images of what is going on here. The first one is Mrs. Pilate Remembers. That's Mrs. Pontius P. Pilate if she gives you her card. It had been a struggle to get where we were. Pontius had worked hard. Long days at the Forum, travel, until we settled in that pitiful little town. As always, trashy people everywhere smelling of goat dung. I had just had the great hall refrescoed, something different this time. I had grown tired of grapes and bacchanals. I wanted the sea, delicate, thin waves, a translucent green with dolphins, a moonlit sky with many hints of stars. I wanted a peaceful home. And the walls were almost complete when he came home, sullen like a worried child. He didn't speak until the sky was silent. And even then, only after 2 bowls of wine. That's the way he handled things. Spoke well in the public, but little to himself or me, especially about the town's business. But finally, he did speak. Of course, I had heard of the one called Christ, had seen his family once at a distance, well-dressed, looked prosperous for people of their sort, very different from the men the Christ took up with to form their club. Oh, I don't know. It was a sort of air the Christ carried with him. Something, well, not local. Regardless, Pontius said he was in a bind. He had to make a decision. But of course he didn't. He allowed it to be made for him, and I know he would. That's why we were in that place anyway, and not in Corinth or Rome. I miss the theater so. And the markets, there, even the dates were second best, and so was the wine. But that's another story. I spent my days teaching the servants and slaves, not an unwilling lot, but the language and cultural barriers were unbelievable. More than once I've spoken ill of my parents, shows how little insight they had to Pontius, or how little value they placed on me. Regardless, it isn't a pretty thought. But my son is good to me. I have good food, good clothes, and occasionally some excitement at the arena. But I wonder, back to my husband, he was not brutal, and that was his problem. He halfway believed in this Jesus. At least he saw no harm in him. Oh, he woke more than once with bad dreams, went all the way to Hadris to have goat entrails read. He still thrashed all that night, walked on the piazza until sunup. Then it was all over. Nothing was the same. My new frescoes were cracked. The first quake in a generation. But it came and cracked my walls. I didn't care whether we moved or not. A person reaches a point that nothing matters. So when he said he had asked for a transfer, I said, fine. That stopped him still in his tracks. He was like a statue, the bowl raised halfway to his mouth, his shoulders yet wet from the bath. The look of surprise, and then that blank look like stone. I had never seen that before, so I turned and went inside. He stood under the loggia until the moon dropped behind the hill. And that's how it all began, and why I am here and he dead, his bones somewhere between Jerusalem and the land of the Shulamites. When the wind blows and I feel sand between my feet and the leather of my sandals, I think of him. I hope his death was quick. He hated suffering, yet in his own way had suffered every moment of his life since his father sent him to the Lyceum and insisted he be a public man. But it's all over now. I have grandchildren, and the prophets of the Christ rage on, some say as far as India. I often wonder how it all adds up. The Christ's family, the rowdy prophets, all those people with a terrible need, and there's so many of them. I'm lucky, though, here with my son. I have good food. My room overlooks the town, the port beyond, and on clear evenings, I sit at my window while small wind plays at my ears. Secrets are whispered to me about the stars I see, about places beyond the horizon, and I still dream of the dolphins, the thin emerald waves caught forever in the clear images of my life before the walls of my new-made fresco cracked forever. Oh, that's something I forgot. You don't have to clap after these. Just wait, as Catherine said, or boo at the end. Okay. I'll read one of a little different tone. It's about the man who lost his pigs. See, all of these are leading up, we are in Lent and so forth. And find my place here. The man who lost his pigs. Should be in 31. I know why he drove my pigs off the bluff. He hates pork. Well, I don't give a fig about what he likes or don't like. He's going to pay for my pigs. It's taken me 15 years of hard work getting my pigs up to where I could make a decent living for me and my family. And there it's gone. There it's gone over the bluff like it was nothing. There I was with my oldest sow, trying to keep the boar from running in and grabbing one of her new pigs. And he's a mean boar. Got one tusk broken off 3 years ago, but now it's back almost as long as the other one, sharp enough to rip a leg open like a scimitar, and I had to be careful. Anyway, I heard the commotion. Pigs squealing like slaughter time. I turned around and my God, pigs, hogs of every size running, kicking their hindquarters in the air like leaves caught in a whirlwind and screaming, slobbering. Then I saw the three of them, the two crazy Johns and him, the Johns walking like men who have had a good night's sleep, and that other one sort of waving his arms like he was walking in his sleep, and the longer he slept, the wilder the hogs got. Even the old sow took to her feet with 5 or 6 piglets clinging to her teats. She's shaking her sides, trying to get rid of them, and they are hanging on, swinging like bell clappers in a fire. The boar gave out a roar and jumped straight up. And then they all ran directly to the bluff, every last one of them sailing over the side like chicken feathers in a light breeze. Well, I couldn't talk. My mouth froze. Couldn't move. Just watched pigs falling into the blue while the Mad Johns and him walked off as pretty as you please. So that's why I'm telling you, somebody's got to pay. You just don't do in somebody's stuff and walk off like that scot-free. But then I went to his family, and they said the same thing the authorities said. Prove it. I'm not giving up, though. My children aren't going to go hungry because of him. I'll find a way. Somebody's got to pay for my pigs. They were my living. This one's of a little more serious nature. It's called The Man Who Owned the Donkey That Carried Palm Sunday, Old Nell. He wasn't your average man. I remember the time just before they executed him. He walked up to me. I was on my way to market and asked to use Old Nell, just like I was out scooter putting around and had no use for either my donkey or my time. It was crazy, no doubt about it. But I started unstrapping the baskets and lifting them from Old Nell's back. She switched her ears and looked at me as if to say, "What's going on?" I patted her on the rump. So he backed up to her left side, gave a little backward jump, swirled his right leg whole, the robe making a perfect fan over Nell's perked up ears. Then everything settled down, sort of like a bird getting comfortable after a strong flight. There he was, straddling Old Nell, as pretty as you please, ready to go. By now the crowds were gathering, women leaving their water pots wherever they could and lifting their heads like hens on red alert. And the men, casual as camels, plodding over as if nothing mattered, but their eyes betrayed their measured steps. Dogs barking here at first and then there, but building as if a gazelle had been spotted. Even the tanner's wife emerged from her stinking house, hands brown as dung, trying to see who carried palm branches and who flung flowers in the path of Old Nell and the newly appointed king, self-appointed, people appointed, who knows. But I worried about my donkey. And as soon as I caught my breath, I thought about me and my family. Nathan had just been appointed village warden. I had met the Roman minister to the 5 villages. He was rough. Took any girl he wanted and nobody said anything. We knew what would happen. I was proud that Nathan was with the government and not against it. It was through this petty minister we first heard of the Christ. So now I began to worry. They could take Christ and impound my donkey. Then all that work would fall on family and Martha, pregnant again. But we need sons, lots of sons. So I went home, but even from there, I heard the crowd. Shouts would rise like a festival and then fall to pure silence. Rise again like quickening wind before a storm, then fall silent as evening. I worked in the fields, pulling tares, unwinding vine stems, praying for a good harvest. Then about dusk, just before leaving the field for supper, I looked up, and there she was, Old Nell at the field's edge, chewing fresh wheat, twitching her ears to the slow rhythm of her chewing, looking freshly curried and as peaceful as a roosting chicken. So she was safe, and the night opened slowly, first with a star here and then one there, a bat searching over the palm grove, and then the moon in its three-quarter face hanging before us like silver as we went home, feeling the sweetness of our lives bound together, safe again, trying not to think of what she had carried to market this very day when the sun was young.